Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Cape Women's Coalition 8th Annual International Women's Day celebration. I'm Sue Rohrbach, the chair. We're so glad to see you all here this morning. As most of you know, our organization works to encourage women to be active in local government and civic affairs on the Cape. This can be running for office, helping somebody who's running for office, going to town meeting, being on a town board, working on an issue or with a nonprofit or group whose goals you're interested in. There are so many ways to take action in our community. We are a fund of the Cape Cod Foundation. We have a wonderful program planned for today. I'm really excited. To begin, I'd like to introduce Senator Elizabeth Warren for her usual welcome video. Thank you, Senator Warren.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to join the 2021 Cape Women's Coalition International Women's Day Breakfast. I would so much rather be with you in person, but I'm glad that we can at least have a chance to do this by video. You know, for several years now, the Cape Women's Coalition has been doing important work supporting Massachusetts women who enter public service. And today, that work is more critical than ever. 2020 was a monumental year for women. We saw women from every background, women of color, LGBTQ women, immigrant women, public school teachers, veterans, moms, grandmas, raise their voices and claim their seats at the table. Just a few weeks ago, Kamala Harris was sworn in as the first female vice president in our nation's history. And I know that millions of little girls across this country see themselves in her. Women have opened doors, broken barriers, shattered glass ceilings, but our fight is far from over. This pandemic has set women back. Women, especially Black and brown women, have been hardest hit by pandemic-related job losses and the loss of childcare options. The consequences are historic, and we need to focus on real structural solutions like universal childcare. By investing in universal childcare and universal pre-K, we can usher in big systemic change that would give millions of families across America a shot at a sustainable, secure financial future. Universal childcare is just one example of how we can stand up for women and build an America that works, not just for a handful at the top, but an America that works for everyone. We've come a long way in the fight for women's rights, but we're just getting started. So today, I want to say thank you for working to raise women's voices and to help more women get involved in public service. The work you do makes our communities, our Commonwealth, and our country stronger. And I'm glad to stand shoulder to shoulder with you in this battle.
Thank you so much, Senator Warren. We really appreciate you doing this for us just about every year that we've had the breakfast. I'd like to acknowledge the state elected officials who are with us or will be spending time with us this morning. Some of them are here right now, and some are going to be joining us a little bit later. Senator Julian Cyr, Senator Susan Moran, Representative Kip Diggs, Representative Sarah Peak, Representative Dylan Fernandez, Representative David Vieira, and Representative Steve Exarchos. I know there are also county and local elected officials that are here as well, so we'd like to thank them for being with us. We also thank Senator Cyr and Representative Peak for their efforts in obtaining the following citation.
From our legislative body, be it be known that the Massachusetts Senate and House of Representatives hereby extend congratulations to the Cape Women's Coalition in recognition of their 8th Annual International Women's Day celebration and in honor of the 40th anniversary of Women's History Month. Be it further known that the Massachusetts Senate and House of Representatives extend their best wishes for continued success, that these citations be duly signed by the President of the Senate and by the Speaker of the House, and attested to and made a copy thereof and transmitted. And we'd also like to thank all of the women, a small group of women who got together and spearheaded this effort to obtain these citations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. The first part of our program will be our breakout rooms for discussion about issues that have been difficult for women in the last year and suggestions for what to do about them here on the Cape. While we're waiting to get into the groups, I have looked up a little bit of information about International Women's Day. And so if anyone would like to hear about how it started and what exactly it is, here goes. International Women's Day grew out of the labor movement to become a recognized annual event by the United Nations. The seeds of it were planted in 1908 when 15,000 women marched through New York City demanding shorter working hours, better pay, and the right to vote. It was the Socialist Party of America who declared the first National Women's Day a year later. The idea to make the day international came from a woman called Clara Zetkin. She suggested the idea in 1910 at an international conference of working women in Copenhagen. There were 100 women there from 17 countries, and they agreed on her suggestion unanimously. It was first celebrated in 1911 in Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. The centenary was established in 2011, so this year we're technically celebrating the 110th International Women's Day. Things were made official in 1975 when the United Nations started celebrating the day. The first theme was adopted by the UN in 1996, was celebrating the past, planning for the future. Wow, we're doing that this morning.
I think we've got everyone back, Sue.
We'll now go to the reports from the breakout groups, and I'll call on each of the facilitators in turn. Lisa Guyon.
Sue, I can't believe you called me first.
I did.
Okay, so we had a really great conversation. We came forward with two issues that we felt like we could put forward as areas that there could be local action items. The first is childcare and early education access. There's been examples in the towns of Wellfleet, P-Town, Eastham, Mashpee, even Chatham. They're working on childcare models and town-funded early education programs that could expand across our region. And Senator Sear was in our group and talked about how there's a good groundswell building behind that. The second was really about isolation and as it relates to social determinants of health and overall health. And there was a really interesting conversation about finding new ways to communicate and providing easier access to new communication tools to find out about what's happening in the community, and then overall ensuring that we're creating a sense of belonging for people, and that means everyone in our communities. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, here, I lost track. Rachel Devaney.
Hi, everybody. I think the biggest thing that we talked about was childcare, but not just kind of that issue, but also how complex that is. We have many women on the Cape that have had to reduce work hours to take care of their children. They are, suffering tons of job loss just because of that, and also struggling with technology. But we also talked about grandparents taking care of grandchildren and the impact that that's having on our elders on the Cape, because many are taking care of their grandchildren because their children are trying to desperately hang on to jobs. So we talked about that, but also that the kind of a hand in hand theme is elder care, and how that's impacting caregivers, and especially those that are suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's. All of our day programs have closed at every single senior center across the Cape. So that has put the burden of caregiving 24/7 on the shoulders of many, whether that's children, spouses, whatever. I mean, it's just a huge deal. And both of those issues also impact housing, food security, income. So we talked about really kind of developing programs that would help women create their own businesses, their own caregiving businesses, their own childcare businesses, which would in turn help other women. The other issue we talked about was actually everybody kind of has suffered a trauma over the last year with loss in family. And I just lost my uncle in December. So I really know how that trauma feels, and also the inability to celebrate his life and to gain closure. That in turn impacts mental health. It in turn filtrates into every single aspect of your life, when you cannot bury somebody peacefully, celebrate their life, whatever your faith is. Not being able to do that has really impacted our community in major ways, in addition to not having the funding to bury our loved ones. That has come up again and again, and all of us agree. We've all seen GoFundMe's like we never have before, in terms of
Yes,
burying our loved ones.
enough.
Okay, yeah. So
So
that's what we talked about.
thank you.
Mhm.
Raleigh.
Hi there. So we did have a great conversation as well. And like the other two facilitators so far, education was a key issue at all levels. We focused a little bit on early education and how that affects women's lives and the children. And then as you move up into the high school ages, a senior high school student being completely remote and having no connection and communication or interaction on the personal level is extremely tough. And so that led into the other challenge is socio-emotional and the mental health factor, whether no matter who you are. We were really lucky to have Tandy from Glasgow, Scotland, and she spoke about her experience being a mental health provider and usually being able to see her patients, and now trying to teach them how to use technology when some of them are really not able to do that. So those were the two challenges that really came out clear. And then as far as action steps for us, we talked about lobbying was a big thing. And also at the local level, we were lucky to have David Vieira on in our group from the state. And he suggested being on the school committee or going to a school committee meeting, making your experiences known, telling your story to the school committee, to your town hall, doing an op-ed even in a newspaper to tell your story so that there's more exposure about these issues for the world and Cape Cod specifically to see, and those in the State House that can, create change. So very happy to be reporting out for that group. A lot of
So
good.
much, Patrick. Tara Wallace.
So my group talked about, we came up with technology being a huge barrier and challenge. The fact that there's very little access and that the Cape does not have high-speed internet. Representative Fernandez was in our group, and he was very informative with a couple of bills at the State House that were working on this, and informed us about an organization called Open Cape at a local level. And so for action steps, one of the things we talked about was, emailing our local officials as well as attending town meetings. And then our second largest issue that was reported was housing and the lack of it, affordable housing, and just not having enough available housing on the Cape, and how that affects everyone. And so some of the action steps and ADUs, that was another thing. Encouraging towns to making sure that you're encouraging your town to support the ADUs in your town, and also in terms of action steps, attending town meetings, getting involved in organizations like Housing Assistance Corporation to find out how you can be more involved and what action steps you can take going further, and writing letters and emails to your legislators and local officials as well.
Thanks a lot. Let's see who's next. Cece Stiles.
Okay, thank you. So my group, we had two main topics that we found that we would like to address. They were both hunger and housing. And one of the things that we did say, if there were issues before due to COVID, the issue for these two items have even grown further. So, I mean, I even heard one of the stories that one of our members said, that there were even problems for some people to have enough food to even make birthday cakes for their kids. I mean, the huge lack when COVID hit, and this was a program, it just made it even worse. But some of the possible solutions that we were thinking of is obviously look for more funding and possible grants for this, and possibly creating a coalition where groups can get together in the Cape and trying to figure out how can we address and improve the situation. One suggestion that was given was, apparently, I think there was the Fishermen's Alliance and the Shellfish, I can never say that word, group. They got together and they got some funding where some of their products, they were able to put it together and give it to some of the pantries. So being creative in creating things like this, where you work together with the existing things that we have, would be very helpful. Have more affordable housing, have the affordable housing money going directly to the municipalities would be great. Another suggestion was to have the town councils get together and use some of the room tax money and put some percentage aside and put it into an affordable housing trust fund or something, so that you have some of that money as it keeps growing and it starts coming in, available to bring it back into our communities. And I'm trying to see what else, if I'm not missing. And for hunger, one of the things too is we do have some good systems in place. That's what the group felt. But we just need to strengthen them, and mainly now. But also the schools, for example, during COVID, they stepped up and they were doing food drives for the students and all this stuff. So when we need to continue those things and have all these organizations get together and help each other so we can fix this and make it better. And I believe that is all that I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Cece. Deb Dagwan.
Okay, I had to unmute myself. Just listening to everyone else. Our group was a little bit older in terms of our age, so not a lot came up about managing the children and whatnot. But the two major things was just managing COVID. Getting what are you going to do for work, and how are you going to get the food and travel. And we had one of our participants talked about arriving here for the first time. They moved here, and COVID just kind of, they didn't get a chance to meet anybody because COVID just kind of totally isolate them. So they're just beginning to, matter of fact, she came today saying that, this is great to attend this affair because she has a chance to mingle and meet, other people. So it had that kind of effect in terms of just managing everything that was around the COVID situation. And the second one was COVID deaths. That came up as our second big challenge. And many of them talked about losing family members and the isolation that was associated with that. And we also had one panelist who COVID didn't affect. She had an illness, but it wasn't a COVID illness. But COVID affected um, her recovery because she needed to be operated on. And so at many hospitals weren't taking anybody in. You couldn't get surgery. You couldn't go see your doctor. So it put a lot of kind of things back. But she did say that, her doctor helped her out a lot in trying to handle that. And the solutions that came up, or action, I won't say solution, but most for managing COVID, most of them said it was a clarity thing. Things were just not quite clear enough as a way to, kind of improve that. And maybe because it was so new, that may have had some effect. I was saying for me, it was scary for me because this was a pandemic, and this is something the country has never experienced in my lifetime, where everybody in the country, was, put on alert. And as for the COVID deaths this year, um, felt like we could use social media a lot more. When someone, your family member, is affected by COVID, and perhaps, or you get the nurses or the hospital is telling you they're not going to make it, and to be able to at least use audio or visual to give you that opportunity to say some last words to someone, to a family member who's deaf, who's dying, um, or see them before they're in those last stages, and for them to see you, and to make them feel a little bit more comfortable when this kind of serious illness occurs. I think those were the two. I'm gonna leave it there. That was the main.
Thanks a lot, Deb.
Mhm.
Amanda Converse.
Thank you. It was way too short. I felt like we could have talked for another half an hour, but we definitely addressed the working parents, and mostly women having to manage their jobs and tend their children and manage their school life because they were remote, but also recognizing that moving forward, when kids are going to be able to go back to school, there are still working parents that need supports, and there are single parents that need supports. And, I'm very grateful to a couple of people for pointing that out, and Representative Diggs pointed that out as well. Is there are single parents that have to manage all of this all the time. So how can we continue to support them as a community moving forward? And then the other huge issue that we talked about was, of course, the isolation, but also the stress that has come from this year, and with financial stress, teachers having to teach in a new way, a lot of us having to do a lot of things in a new way, and seniors being isolated from their communities and from their families, and so as we are able to come out of this, how do we support that, and put mental health supports in place? And I think it's shown a light on definitely how important our connection to each other is, and how do we continue to support that. We definitely talked about how at the base of it all, as Representative Diggs keeping each other safe is first and foremost. But as we continue on this journey, it's important to have a spirit of collaboration, and to have clear communication. And then what I thought was really interesting was, that was pointed out is, we talk about going back to work and going back to school, but it's more about, much like this breakfast, it's moving forward, right? Because we're not going to go back to the way things were, and maybe we shouldn't necessarily in some instances. And for example, one of the women that was in our group said she's never been able to attend this breakfast before because it sold out. And this being virtual enabled her to be here and to experience it. So, maybe we're looking at, there could be hybrid models of lots of different things. And just because we can go back to in person, we shouldn't necessarily discount some of the good stuff that the online, virtual modes of connecting enabled us to do. So that was.
Thanks, Amanda. Paula Schnepp.
Thank you, Sue. I'd like to echo Amanda in saying that I wish we had more time. We had a very lively group, jumped right in, and one of the issues that emerged as a huge challenge here is housing. And I know it's been brought up by several of the groups so far, but I think the pandemic has even heightened the challenge, as a lot of the housing options that existed before are not existing anymore. I know that some of you have heard statistics about the availability of houses for sale under 500,000, and it's a shrinking number. So that definitely was high on our list, the housing, not only affordability, but the diversity of options, especially as people age, and may not need the kind of housing space they have, but they don't really have any alternatives to stay in their community if they want to downsize. The other area that sort of was the way to synthesize a lot of the other issues that are challenges are the stresses that women in particular face in managing all aspects of work and family life. The pandemic obviously amplifying a lot of those challenges, where having children at home and still trying to work, or perhaps having to reduce your employment because your childcare obligations have increased. So childcare affordable options was definitely sort of, I wouldn't say a subsidiary to that, but definitely a piece of one of those stresses that especially women have to handle. Some of the actions that we got to just at the very end of our conversation involved maybe looking at some models in terms of housing that have been around, but maybe haven't been as successful in implementation here in the Cape, like co-housing. Co-housing kind of does two things, brings affordable options and builds communities where you have support systems in place, to help sometimes with the childcare, but also those issues of isolation, and even after the pandemic ends and we can get together, I think there are a lot of people in our community that are isolated. So co-housing is one of those things to explore as an option. I think at all times, and I speak as an elected representative, having the community show up and express the need for housing and funding and making sure that this remains a priority in all our communities is really important, and advocating for more money, whether that's at the local level or at the state level. That is always a way that we probably need to move forward. In terms of working with on the stresses, one idea came up that got a lot of nods was creating phone trees, recognizing that sometimes those personal connections can really make a difference. And a lot of us are not connected to our own families because of COVID, but maybe there's local answers for people making those connections, seniors checking in on working parents and vice versa. I mean, they both can perhaps support each other in getting through these harder times. And then the last suggestion was creating more opportunities for maybe senior citizens to interact with school age kids, through some of our municipal organizations, whether through our senior centers or community centers. Thank you.
Thanks, Paula. Let's see, who next? Pen Doobie.
Thank you. We had a great group also, and we tended to look at things from two broad overviews. The first of which was that everything in the pandemic has disproportionately affected women. And the second one was that there is a even stronger disparity in how that has affected women of color. And so under those two things, the comments that came up, a lot of them were around childcare, early education, the issue about foster care, parents who have traditionally taken care of children and now weren't able to because of the disease. The issue of women with participating in the workforce, the recognition of the fact, there's a general recognition that all of these issues are much more powerful for women than necessarily for most men. And the issues of isolation, caring for older people, and the concern about education. We talked a little bit about Common Start, which is a statewide potential legislation that would help greatly around all issues of early education and childcare. And then this around disparity, we had a number of people in our group who were active members of No Place for Hate, excuse me. It probably feels like no place for help sometimes. But the idea of paying attention to our local communities and finding ways to build community one-on-one and within groups, raising awareness across all women that these issues affect us and that they affect women of color disproportionately, and looking in on each other. And I guess probably one of the most powerful things that came out of it to me was there is tremendous wisdom in this group. We don't have to reinvent wheels. So if, sharing resources, sharing understanding of what groups are out there working on housing, working on childcare, which ones are dealing with issues around racial inequity, that collection of information can be a tremendous resource for everybody here. And that we also don't have to reinvent any wheels. So they rely on groups that are already doing this was a strong suggestion. And another thing that came up around technology was it would be really helpful if some of us could find ways to teach older women who do not know how to use Zoom and are cut off from that kind of participation by either individually or collaboratively finding a way to bring those women back into the circle, because a lot of these older women are doubly isolated because of the fact that they don't have access to technology, either through a machine or through knowledge of how to use it. And I think that's pretty much what we covered. It was a terrific group, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Pen. Karen Maza.
Well, we talked mostly about the issues and had less time to talk about the solutions, but we do have a few ideas. With regard to COVID, we agreed that it is an overarching issue that has impacted and made worse existing problems that we've been dealing with. The first one I would say is the juggling issue. Women have to juggle caregiving for both their children as well as their elderly relatives. And so that was a big part of our discussion. The second impact would be isolation and what that means in terms of the availability of resources. And when we talk about isolation, we were talking about both geographic isolation as well as social isolation. Geographically, one of the people in our group was from Nantucket, and she pointed out the difficulty of having less resources available there. And the kinds of resources that we talked about in particular were affordable housing and food insecurity. Social isolation was also an issue. when we started to talk about solutions, there were three things that came out. One was, again, the reference to the Common Start Coalition, which is sponsoring legislation that would make affordable, high quality early child care more accessible. And so that means staying in touch with not only that coalition, but other groups that would help lobby for that legislation, staying in touch with our own delegation. Another solution that was discussed was the reaching out to each other. You've mentioned that before in other groups. And one person referred to that as a sort of village style network that she created with her neighbors. And are just remembering creating those kinds of networks is an important thing going forward. And that the third thing was referencing the fact that we have a county government, and the fact that we have that county government structure is really helpful in terms of organizing resources that have been made available, both in terms of food resources, as well as their organizing health resources and the distribution of vaccine. And on that note, I'd also like to commend our state legislators for having worked together to lobby the governor to be able to create the vaccination site we now have opening up at Cape Cod Community College. That kind of state legislative support is really important to us. So that's what I'd like to share at this time.
Thank you to all the facilitators and all the groups. I have to say, the responses, some of them were, to me, anticipated, and some of them were quite different, but right on point.
Susan?
Yes.
We have one, my group hasn't reported in.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
That's okay.
I'm so sorry. Becky.
The 12 people, the 12 women who were with me, we would like to have a report in.
Women's Coalition Advisory Board. She's the vice chair, and I forgot her. Oh my gosh. Please
That's okay.
Please go ahead. Glad you raised your hand.
Thank you. So our two, we narrowed it down to our two things. I'll be very quick. And one was childcare, early childcare, and we were welcomed Susan Moran, who was a state legislator, and she's promoting Common Start. And so she recommends that if we don't know about Common Start, to Google it, and we can find it out. As well as they are working very closely with, I think they said 70 business corporations across the state on the Mass Coalition for Early Childhood Education. So that's a business support for that as well. So those are the issue and the action item all together. And the other issue was that although we are looking forward to meeting in person, we do recognize that technology that we have learned to use is an asset in the long run, and that we can use it as we continue to do our activism as women on Cape Cod. And that's my brief report.
Thank you, Becky. And thank you, everybody. Thank you to the facilitators and the people in the groups. That was fantastic. Where are we here? And now I have the pleasure of introducing our main speaker, Charlotte Goler. Any questions that you have during her remarks, please put them in the chat, and we'll hope that there's time for them at the end. If our time runs out, we will do our best to answer some of the key questions on our website later. Charlotte Goler Ritchie is an experienced leader and administrator with a background in public service, political activism, and civil rights. A past distinguished public service fellow at the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, she was recently named as the interim advisory board chair at the center, which is actually where I met her. Charlotte is a former state representative, commissioner for the Mass Commission Against Discrimination, housing chief, and neighborhood development director for the city of Boston. She also was the first African-American woman to run for mayor of Boston. She serves on several nonprofit boards and for years has worked to open doors into politics and government to women and people of color. A graduate of Rutgers University, Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, and Suffolk University's Sawyer School of Management, Charlotte's a former US Peace Corps volunteer and mother to 2 adult daughters who are seeking to effect positive change in their own communities. Charlotte?
Morning, Sue. I hope everyone can hear me. I see, okay, I hope you can see me and hear me. Thank you, Sue, and thank you, everyone. It's good to see you all on Zoom. I want to appreciate the planning committee who invited me and included me in their civically minded circle. And it's really great to be here. I also want to acknowledge the elected officials who are with us and appreciate the work that they are doing, particularly during this difficult time. And to you, the attendees, thank you for joining us today. I know several of you, and so it's great to, again, to see you on Zoom. When I was thinking about this gathering, Sue was telling me about it and others in the planning committee, I was thinking how much these gatherings are important to us. In so many ways, they are affirming, they are energizing, they inform, they're filled with knowledge. I learned a lot just listening to the reports coming out of the breakouts. And they help to build community, which I know that the Cape Women's Coalition is about. That's why they've been doing this now for so many years. I did appreciate the range of topics that you all discussed during your breakouts. You touched on a lot of the things, as Sue was saying, that we might have expected, but others that we might not have thought of. Certainly the issue of COVID-19, which Deborah spoke to, the pandemic, and others of you remains a front burner issue. Clearly, if we don't have our health, it's going to be hard for us to advocate for universal health care, which was the issue that one of the issues that Senator Warren mentioned during her opening remarks, and all of the other issues that have come up, the affordable housing issue that Paula mentioned, and needing a diversity of options, the isolation of families and seniors that was noted, and managing the educational needs and aspirations of our children. That's a lot. And I know that families all over the state and all over this country are grappling with these things. The theme of this year's breakfast is perfect. I think perfect, a perfect time that we're in now to look back and also to look forward as we move ahead. Let's quickly look back. The events of the past year have been extremely difficult for everyone. In no specific order, I wanted to recall with you some of those issues as I saw it that affected people in the city of Boston where I live, and also no doubt affect you on Cape Cod, like I said, all over the state, all over the country and beyond. 2020 was hard. We know that the circumstances around COVID and the related issues adversely affected women, adversely affected everyone, but women were disproportionately affected. Penelope spoke to that. Whether we're talking about the fact that women make up the majority of frontline workers, risking their lives to care for the rest of us, or that women lost and were forced to leave their jobs disproportionately. As women, we are primary caregivers in many of our households. We're looking after our children, and in many situations, we're looking after our children and we're looking after our parents and grandparents. In 2020, we witnessed that great racial reckoning, the marches, the massive protests due to the police and vigilante killings of Black people, The Black Lives Matter movement, which was founded in 2013, reemerged more powerful than ever. In fact, what was a national movement became a global movement, and it was started by women, 3 women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Khan Cullors, and Opal Tometi. Black and brown people and immigrants, particularly those who are undocumented, were disproportionately affected by the pandemic. You all have touched on that. The Asian American community experienced great hostility, accompanied by a growing number of hate crimes. It's something that we are concerned about today in 2021. And the list goes on. So yes, 2020 was a difficult year, but we women are resilient, and we have accomplished many things despite these challenges. And it was great to be able to witness the achievements of so many women throughout the year. Also, women's issues last year, women's issues, their stories, leadership, knowledge, ambition, and success were on full display in 2020. Last year, you may recall, began with 2 historical milestones that I want to remind us of. The first, of course, was the commemoration of the 19th Amendment to the US Constitution, when our ancestors achieved the great success of the right to vote after many years of struggle. We acknowledged the hard truth at that time that while we celebrated the 100 years of women's suffrage, Black women and women of color had to wait 40 years to be able to vote freely throughout this country. And that 55 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, our society is still grappling with the issue of voter suppression. Last year, just as we celebrated that anniversary of women's suffrage, we also revisited the struggle to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. Very, very belatedly, the ERA received the final necessary ratification vote from the Virginia House of Delegates, thanks to women legislators and the speaker, a woman. While the deadline to ratify the ERA was in 1982, nearly 40 years ago, passage of the measure would have sought to address gender inequality and discrimination. And still, all these years later, the passage of this measure was a powerful symbol for many women across the country. Despite the social unrest that I mentioned earlier, the great strife that we saw, women were impactful in 2020. In government, women were leading their communities. They were our nurses, our doctors, our public health experts. Women were prominent in the media, telling stories about what was going on in the world around us. That was really good to see. They were the biochemists contributing to the efforts to develop a cure for COVID-19. I don't know if you all have had a chance to see what is a very inspirational video that has been circulating. It's called The Women Are Coming. And given your focus, around the celebrating women around the world, it would be interesting, you should try to get a hold of that video. It features 24 women, heads of state, who are leading their countries in Asia, Africa, Europe, the Caribbean, New Zealand, and our very own Kamala Harris is featured as well. So here, as proud as we are to have a woman VP in the White House, we know that Vice President Harris stands on the shoulders of many women who came before her. And that's why it's good to periodically remind ourselves of the history that we have in this country, that women who make up, half the population or a little more than half the population, that we have been part of movements, that we have been part of history, part of change. And I don't know that those stories have been told sufficiently. And certainly women of color are often left out of the narrative. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York during the 1960s and 70s. So yes, I remember one of those sheroes that we celebrate today, who came before Vice President Kamala Harris and the other women all around the world. And we know who that is, right? The late, great Shirley Chisholm. I mention her because she was the congresswoman from my community in Brooklyn, Bedford-Stuyvesant and Crown Heights. My early years were spent living during the civil rights movement of the 1960s. I was a little girl, and also the women's liberation movement, the anti-war movement, Stonewall, and the gay rights movement. I remember the debates, the protests, the activism, the strife. And so when I joined the Peace Corps in 1981, that activism that had surrounded me all those many years became embedded deeply inside of me as well. I served in a rural community in Kenya where I taught English as a second language to high school students. I was there for 2 years. During those 2 years as a volunteer in East Africa, I discovered my own resilience, along with the rewards of service and the value of advocacy. People did not have sources of fresh water. They had to wait for rainwater. There was a well that you had to walk a distance to collect water. And women were primarily responsible for retrieving water, for preparing meals, and taking care of families. And I really learned a lot about the struggles of women living abroad. I gained a great appreciation and respect for the people I encountered, for their lives and experiences, and for the women, again, outside of the US, and all that they do and all that they achieve. The students in my classes, they could speak like three and four languages. They knew about the history, the geography of the United States. They knew about our economies. They were so impressive. We don't hear a lot about that. We hear about the difficulties of the situations that people in other countries face. And when I was growing up, Africa was not reported on very favorably. Things have changed. It certainly helped to have a president who had roots in Africa. But there was so much beauty and just the strength and goodness of people that I encountered there, that when I came back, I thought I would go into journalism and write about my experiences there. However, we know how life gets in the way of our plans. I ended up, when I got back from Africa, I got married, I moved to Boston, and soon after we had 2 daughters, while I was working for a community newspaper, the economy changed on us and the stock market crashed, our economy tanked, and as a consequence, the social issues, the social ills that were beneath the surface emerged, very much like what we've seen during this period of this pandemic. It's not like the issues affecting Black and Brown people were just appeared. They were there, but it was they were masked by a robust economy and by other issues. Well, it was similar back for me, at least back in the 1990s, living in Boston. I soon realized during that time that the community needed more than a homeowner who was focused solely on the upkeep of her home. We had just bought our home in Dorchester. What was needed was the activism of all of the residents, everyone, all hands on deck. At that point, when I was volunteering for this community newspaper, I had really gotten to know a lot of my neighbors, and I got to know the community where I had decided to make a home there for myself and my family with Winston. And we got to know the aspirations and struggles of our neighbors. Several of the neighbors encouraged me to run for office. And I can tell you it was something that I did not even remotely consider doing. In 1995, however, I did decide to run for a seat in the House of Representatives where I served for 5 years, working closely with the people of Dorchester and Roxbury. In my third term, the mayor then was Tom Menino, and he asked me to join him in city government. And I thought long and hard about that, that invitation to do that, but I thought it would help me advance the agenda that I had established working in collaboration with residents. It would help me achieve some of those goals, I guess more easily. And so I accepted this invitation and it ended up working in city government for 8 years, leading the city's affordable housing campaigns, promoting economic development as Boston's chief of housing and director of neighborhood development. When Deval Patrick was elected governor, I returned to state government and worked with him, and then ultimately ended my service as a commissioner with the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, as Sue mentioned when she introduced me. Throughout my career, I have remained engaged in community and today serve on a number of boards. And it's community and civic engagement, which is the focus of this breakfast and the focus of your agenda, which is laudable. 8 years ago, I did run for mayor of Boston. I thought I wanted to and was qualified to lead the city, and I was prepared to put aside all of my sort of personal interests and on behalf of the city. I thought that I would be able to make a contribution. I was the only woman in the race. There were about a dozen of us who were running then, and as you know, I did not win. I certainly learned a lot, and I learned a lot about the city. I made so many friends. I learned a lot about myself. But I can tell you, I'm so excited this year to see the number of women running. I was the only one running in 2013. Now there's several women who've thrown their hat in the race. And I can say, for those of you who are thinking about running for office, you get in that race because you expect to win, you plan to win. But should you not win, you should know that you do open that door ajar for other women who will come behind you. There may be actually elected officials. I think I saw Senator Moran maybe did a text, and Rep. Diggs was in here, and I think Rep. Peak and others are here. I know Select Woman Linda Sabula, who is one of the organizers, are here. And people have different relationships with their elected officials, right? Some of them are very collegial. Others may feel that their electeds are not are not accessible. And I think I have to say, from my days as an elected official, I think that electeds want to hear from their constituents. They want to be in contact with them. They want to understand what is on the front burner in terms of their lives and what the issues they're grappling with. And there's so much you can learn from them. So while you are advancing an agenda, and it's an excellent agenda around childcare and housing and jobs and other things, the environment, remember that your elected officials are, just so they can help you advance that agenda. So don't forget that, and find your champions to help you with these issues. So running for office, probably don't have a lot of time to get into this, except I would say, one, I encourage you to do it. If you cannot run for office, you can support a candidate who is running for office. There is a campaign every year. It's municipal, state, federal, there is a campaign every year. So voting, yes, that's the basic. You got to be a voter, you got to be an educated voter, but you also can work on a campaign, and that will help. You can, by working in the campaign, you can bring your agenda to the campaign, you can shape policy, you can help with the grassroots organizing, you can help with the fundraising. There's so many roles to do. But if running for office is not your thing, civic engagement has to be a priority. And there are no, I don't think ifs, ands, or buts about that. We all have to, I mean, that's the rent. Everybody talks about the rent that we pay for being here, for having a roof over our head, for being able to feed our families and all. Giving back to others is that rent that we pay. I am hopeful about the future. I'm hopeful about this year, 2021, and the future that that this year brings and looking forward. I want to see more women on boards as CEOs, just like you all do. I want to see more women as state and municipal leaders in all sectors. I want there to be a strong diversity, a strong, recognition of diversity, and you all have referenced diversity. So I know that it's important to your organization. You know that diversity is our strength, but then how do we actualize that? We've talked a lot last year about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what can we be doing? Well, many of you are affiliated with your own organizations, and maybe it's time to put together a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, to put it down on paper, to talk about it, to share it with others, to really commit to specific, actionable, measurable goals. Collaboration is key, and I think it was Amanda who reported out from the breakout, who spoke about the issue of collaboration. That's something we have to do whenever, wherever we can. There's very little that we do by ourselves. We need others in partnership. We need allies in partnership and collaboration to achieve our goals. When you look around your organization, when you look around at the events that you attend, try to see who's missing from our circle. Let's reach out to them. Let's reach out and bring them in. You heard me mention that I had worked on a community newspaper, and that was a way to get to know my community. Well, you will be able to affect change much with greater ability if you know the people in your community. And when we get in these neighborhoods, sometimes it's hard to reach out. And also some of us may feel some shyness about knowing who our next door neighbor is, but that needs to be a priority. I want to say, Sue mentioned that we're on a board together for an organization. I want to say that there are organizations that you should know about in terms of collaboration, in terms of your own personal career advancement, in terms of your political aspirations. The organization that Sue and I belong to is the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy. You can actually go there for a certificate graduate program that prepare women for opportunities to serve in the public sector. But there are any number of organizations. I see Jean Morrison is in this meeting, and she and I have worked together. We have collaborated through the Massachusetts Women of Color Coalition, MAWOC. There are also organizations like the Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus. I serve on the board, and they endorse candidates, women candidates. They're nonpartisan. And then there's Emerge, which you all probably heard about, which is an excellent training ground for women. So there are ways to advance, again, your interests around politics and public policy through various programs. I'll also mention there is the Commonwealth Seminar, and that folks can apply for that. There's a revolving admission Commonwealth Seminar run by a friend of mine, Leverett Wing, and his goal with that program is to open doors to government. Again, for many of us, it was for me too. Part of the reason I didn't think about running for office before I ran for office finally, or was convinced to run for office, was it felt like it was a secret society. I didn't know what was going on in there. I didn't have a friend. I didn't have an associate who was an elected official. There was no blueprint written handbook, but this Commonwealth Seminar is a way to really find out that government is there to work for you and it is accessible. So I wanted to share some of that with you. I will also mention this, and then we'll wrap up. I'm sure this program, we want to bring it to a close, but I want to say the importance of conversation. Last year, there was a group of us, about 30 of us, that got together and said, we want to have conversations about race. That's not an easy conversation to have, even as a former commissioner of the Mass Commission Against Discrimination. It's something that we know exists, but you might have that conversation with people who look like you, but in a diverse room, it could feel awkward. We don't know necessarily the words to use to talk about how we're feeling. And we have committed ourselves, these 30 people, to meet once a month to learn about our Indigenous brothers and sisters, the Native community, the Asian American Pacific Islander community, the Latinx community, the Black African American community. So we are talking about history that a lot of us didn't know, that is our shared history. And we've been talking about ways that we could promote greater understanding and tolerance. Imagine if we all had these conversations. There's so much out there to talk about. And we need to work to address the racism and the other isms, the phobias that are run rampant throughout our country. We need to rein them in, and we need to relegate them to the sidelines. And I think people want that now. These conversations are popping up everywhere. And to the extent that you all can, in your circles, engage in these conversations, we can learn so much from that. My final point will be about mentorship. And I'll just say briefly that I would not be where I am today were it not for the mentors who helped guide me in my life. And I will say I have experienced great reward from mentoring others, mentoring my daughters, mentoring my nieces, mentoring my neighbors, mentoring the people who worked with me on my staff. Mentoring is a two-way street, but it is greatly beneficial. So I recommend that you will think about who in your life can help be a sounding board, can help guide you through the difficult periods, who will have your back and your interests and want to see you succeed, and who can you do that for? So I will end here by saying that I hope that 2021, I believe that 2021 is going to be a year of improved health for us, improved resilience. And I wish you all good health, resilience, and the energy and drive to make the change that you want to see in your own communities, the allies and networks and mentors that you want to be part of, that you want to include as part of your life. And I just wish you all the best as you find ways to be more deeply and civically engaged in your communities. Thank you.
Oh, Charlotte, thank you so much. That was just terrific. Really, really appreciate your being part of our program and telling us a little bit about yourself and your experiences, and sort of pulling together all of what we had said and giving us some very wise thoughts and advice about how we, as you said, move forward and not moving forward, but not going back. We looked back, but we're not going back. We're moving forward.
Thank you, Sue.
So I just want to thank thank Charlotte over and over. Thank to all the breakout group facilitators, and thank you especially to Linda Sebula, the chair of this morning's event, to Maggie French and Courtney Butler, our technical magicians, and to Andy Genser and Liz Hartsgrove, who've been working hard on the event committee also. And most of all, thank you so much for coming and participating this morning. Just listening to the comments that came out of the breakout groups, boy, there was a lot of participation and a lot of really great thoughts. We appreciate the local officials, like the select board members and school committee members who've been here, and the representatives and senators who have been here and have been part of the breakout groups, which was a really big help. Just quickly to kind of go over the things that people talked about and the things that we want to move forward with action. The overarching thing was COVID. It included things like childcare, education, isolation. That was a really big issue, and not one that I personally would have put at the top, but feeling it I should have. Housing, food insecurity, and let's see, what else do we have here? And just the whole thing about COVID having come down harder on women, and especially women of color. The problems with managing COVID, no matter where you are in your life, if you're young, if you have children, if you're taking care of older parents, if you're an older grandparent taking care of children, if you're just an older person, all of us have had a lot of challenges, and pandemic has just amplified the challenges for women. So there are so many different action ideas that people have talked about, and I think we'll be following up on those in our programs to come. So we did talk about, the actions that you can take: running for office, helping someone who's running, going to town meeting, being on a town board, working on an issue or with a nonprofit or a group whose goals you're interested in. So many ways to take action in our community. If you haven't done it, just go to your town's website and see what's going on and where you might fit in. The towns are always looking for people to fill slots on town committees. I'd like to quickly read the poem that we always read every year at this event. It's by James Oppenheim. As we go marching, marching, unnumbered women dead, go crying through our singing, their ancient call for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their drudging spirits new. Yes, it's bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too, remembering the Bread and Roses event. As you're thinking about all that we've heard and talked about this morning, always remember the importance of International Women's Day and of supporting women. In addition to this breakfast, we have other programs: a monthly roundtable breakfast in pre-pandemic times, and hopefully again before too long. Currently, we've been having Zoom events about every 6 weeks. Our next event is a 2-part series to meet and hear from members of our Cape Legislative Delegation. We're collaborating with the League of Women Voters of the Cape Cod area, and they will lead the first session on March 26th. The second, which we will lead, is on April 15th. It will be an in-depth discussion with the new members of the delegation. Please go on our website to find out more and register for these events. Thank you again for being here this morning, and we hope to see you again soon. And remember, we're not going back. We're moving forward as women together.